All right, good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you for being here. This is the second gathering of the choir that we had. Hopefully you have the agenda, so I won't go through that piece by piece, but I think there are a number of things that we want to, information that we want to share with you, and one of the things that we've talked about is working with Alan, who is joining us remotely, really to think about the larger picture of what we're trying to do with the choir. And so with that, I will turn it over to Alan, and we'll jump right into the agenda. Okay.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello, Alan.
Here I am again, speaking to you from a secure location somewhere. Somewhere on the planet. I just saw the movie The Martian, so as far as we know, I could be on another planet. Somebody once said that a social movement is only as good as its analysis, and that's what I've been asked to talk to you about today, very briefly. The analysis is everything, because the analysis is where the questions come from. It's where our perception of what's the problem comes from. What do we think the solutions are? So if the analysis is going to dictate where this goes. And I think it's really important to keep in mind that people have been working at this for generations, and we haven't had a whole lot of success, which suggests that the analysis that we've been using is the wrong one. And so that's what I want to talk to you about. You all have the copy of this chart. It's out of Privilege, Power, and Difference that shows individuals and systems. The one thing I would add to that, maybe I can find a more complete version to email you, Sybil, and you can distribute to everyone. But that word systems at the top should have a whole lot of things attached to it. Systems of privilege have dominance, centeredness, identification, all that stuff. And of course, social systems have structures, they have cultures, they have ecological arrangements such as segregation and stuff like that. So that word systems really needs to have a lot of things that describe it that are attached to it. And of course, in this culture, we use an individualistic model to understand everything. So when something bad happens on a college campus, a racist incident, a sexual assault, you're probably not any strangers to the cry that goes up that whoever did it needs to be held accountable, which is not an unreasonable thing to do, but that seems to be our sole focus. So we think that individual accountability is the issue here, the only issue. And which means we also think that some kind of punishment is the form that justice takes. That's the full resolution of the problem. This person who did this thing gets apprehended and they get punished. And I want to just throw out an alternative model that Native Americans in particular make use of, and in many parts of the country and in Canada, it's making a comeback, which is something called restorative justice. And the restorative justice movement basically starts from the idea that individual misbehavior happens because a connection has been broken. So that our model of punishing people by sending them to prison, putting them in solitary confinement, is just the opposite of what they see as the solution. What they see as the solution is to restore the balance that's been lost, restore the connection between the individual and their community. Because if you really feel like you're embedded in a community, then behaving badly generally doesn't occur to you, because you value belonging to that community. And that generally is what has kept human beings from doing bad things for most of our time on Earth. And the restorative justice model basically is based on the idea that when that breaks down, it's more than an issue of the individual who's done something wrong. Something much larger has broken down, and that something larger has to get restored. Which means then that we have to take this thing that's whoever somebody has done, this bad thing, and we have to locate it in patterns, because it's not an isolated incident. Sexual assault is an epidemic in the United States. It's not just one man doing a bad thing. Racist incidents on college campuses everywhere else. These are patterns. And so the individual, while we're responding to the individual, which is a legitimate thing to do, we also have to respond to these patterns that this individual behavior is part of. we make choices as individuals, and we get held accountable to that. But I think it's really crucial that we always keep in mind that these choices that we're making, good ones and bad ones, are always in relation to something. And that unless we're crazy, and what we're talking about is behavior really that isn't just people being mentally ill, there is some point of reference that individuals use to decide how to behave that from their point of view makes their behavior okay. And we have to understand what is the world this person is seeing such that their behavior seems to them to be okay. We often hear the statement of this is not what we're about, you know. Racist behavior is not what St. Mary's Way is about. And I get stuck on this word we. And when we say that this kind of thing is not what we're about, who do we mean by we? And somebody once said that nobody lives in New York City. They live in neighborhoods. Nobody lives in the whole city. And nobody is a member of St. Mary's College. They are a member of living arrangements, a class, sports teams, whatever it is. That's where they really feel that they are comparing their behavior to other people. Sociologists use the concept of a reference group. When I decide whether or not I'm dressing appropriately, I'm behaving appropriately, I'm doing that by comparing myself to some group of people that for me is significant. And my guess is that for nobody is the whole of St. Mary's College that reference group. There are groups within this college. For faculty, it's other faculty. It may be just their departments. For students, it's not the whole student body. It's not the whole college. It might be where they live. It might be the sports team they're on, the department they're majoring in. But there is some much smaller group that we are paying attention to when we decide whether or not our behavior is appropriate or not. So if we're going to feel bound to a culture, and the whole mission statement here has to do with creating the culture at St. Mary's, in which the kind of behavior that we're seeing as a problem wouldn't occur. If someone's going to feel bound to that, first of all, there has to be a clear thing for them to feel bound to. It has to be visible. So if we're going to have a better culture, if you will, that everyone's going to feel bound to, that culture has to be really visible to everyone. And they have to feel that they belong to that. Because that's where our investment comes from, in fitting in being accepted, in living up to the standards. So we have to be able to see what this thing is, and we have to feel some kind of being bound to it. The other thing that makes it complicated is that we like to think that St. Mary's College is not about racism. It's not about sexual violence, that somehow these things are not part of the culture of St. Mary's College. I think that would be a miracle if that were true. Because this college is part of the United States, and there's a whole history. This stuff is going on all over the place. So on some level, I think we have to consider the possibility that the college, even though we may not be conscious of it, the college, there is ambivalence built in about these standards of behavior. There is ambivalence, and there are two sides to ambivalence. So we have to be aware of the way in which St. Mary's College is organized in ways that actually promote the very things that we want to change. So just to give you an example, St. Mary's is a complex organization. It's organized around a hierarchy, which means that dominance, the idea of dominance, the idea of being in control of things, the idea that some people have power over other people, these are core principles that organize the everyday life of the college, as they do every other organization in this, just about every other organization in this country. So if you buy into that idea that control is a good thing, dominance is somebody being in charge is a good thing, then the fact is that we're also buying into the bedrock principles that underlie things like white supremacy, class oppression, patriarchal manhood. I mean, patriarchal manhood is defined in terms of the ability of real men to always be in control, and that drives men's violence, because violence is an instrument of control, including sexual violence against women. So notice how the hierarchy of control and domination that we think we can't do without in organizing something like a college, those are intimately tied. to the very problems that we're trying to solve. So it's not some problem out there that's in individuals who behave badly. It's also rooted in the very way in which most organizations in this country are put together. So if we want to have a community in which, to me, the ideal is a community in which a man sexually assaulting a woman wouldn't even occur to him as something that might be okay. That's the ideal here, I think, that we're talking about. And if we want to have a system that is organized in that way, then we have to learn how to work simultaneously from both individual and systemic levels of analysis. We have to learn how to pay attention to the particular cases of an individual's behavior, but at the same time, we have to develop the ability to contextualize that individual's behavior in the context of something larger. Because this is how social life actually works. No one does anything simply because of who they are. They also don't do anything simply because they're participating in a particular kind of system. It's both of those things. And we have to get really good at this, because we've been set up for our whole lives to think only in terms of individual motivations and punishing individuals and trying to deter individuals from behavior that we don't like. So the individualistic model has a really powerful hold on our imagination. And the only way to loosen its hold that I know of is the way you learn anything else, which is practice. We have to get, what I like to think of is we have to get really nimble at this, at moving among, in our own minds, in our own conversations, in our own analysis. We have to get nimble at moving among these different levels of thinking about what's happening. We have to be able to think about individuals and their personalities and their motivations, but we also have to be able to think of the systems, small systems and large systems, in which they're doing all of this. And we have to get good at that. And most importantly, we have to include ourselves in the analysis. I think there's a tendency to see those people who do bad things as somehow being over there, and we're over here. And the fact is that we are all up to our necks in the same thing. So we have to find ways to bring ourselves into that analysis and our understanding of what's going on. Last thing I want to say is that this is a big process that we're talking about. It's a process with lots of layers. And different layers respond to change at a different pace. So, you know, on the small layer of a department or a sports team, change can happen fairly quickly. On a larger level of a whole institution, change takes longer. And so these various efforts to change things don't all go at the same pace, which means we also have to incorporate into our analysis time and how all of that works out. Last thing I want to say, which goes back to the little picture that you have here. When I used to teach classes on race and gender and class, I used to come into the class on the very first day and I would draw this picture up on the board. And I would say, this is a picture of where we are. You know those maps that you encounter where it says you are here? I think we always need some way of orienting ourselves. And this little model is really useful because when we start talking only about the individual and understanding what's happening only in terms of that, we can look at this and say, well, that's true, but this individual is connected to something larger. And this something larger has all these characteristics. And all of them are problematic. So I suggest that you take some version of this little picture and, I don't know, draw it on your hand, tape it on your wall, put it on the mirror. I'm serious here, by the way. Because this is the only way this starts to become second nature to us. So that our intuition starts to be informed by a much more complex view of ourselves and the world than the one that we were raised to think with. That's what I want to say. Before I turn this over to Leonard, are there any burning questions about what I've just said to you? We don't have much time for this. But if there's something that's really bothering you about what I just said that doesn't make any sense, for example, ask me now.
I actually love what you said. And it's something that we've been talking about with Title IX for restorative justice and that sort of thing. And I know that having had some conversations with a number of students over the last few weeks, there's this need, this want for some sort of restorative justice from the two major incidents that we've been spending a lot of time talking about, the Confederate flag at the basketball game and then the Natty Bill hunt. And our community is ripe for some sort of response, restorative justice effort. The problem is, how do we do that when, at least in one case, we don't know who's responsible? In another case, perhaps the person involved doesn't feel that they really did anything wrong. Where do we go from there? How do we repair our community?
Well, I can only tell you what I think, right? I don't have a nice, neat answer to this. That's what this group is here for, really, is to work towards good answers to that question. But I'll tell you, the first thing that comes to mind is that you may not know who did these things, but you can start asking questions about the community itself. What is it about this community that would make someone think this was an okay thing to do? Mm-hmm. And that question you can begin with without knowing anything about any individuals who did anything. What is it that made this, the thing that got me into this work, 40 years ago was sexual assault, was sexual violence. And very early on, I came to the realization that came out of radical feminist analysis of men's violence, which is that men think this is okay. They wouldn't do it if they didn't think it's okay. So then the question is, where are those messages coming from? Such that men would grow up thinking that this kind of behavior was acceptable. And the answer is, if you look at films, advertising, all over the place, the messages are everywhere that a real man is a man who is in control of a woman's body. Mm-hmm. So it's normalized. It's mainstream. Catherine McKinnon once said about sexual assault, she said, sexual violence in this country is not forbidden, it is regulated. Mm. In the same way that violence in football is not forbidden, it's regulated. But the violence is totally okay. In fact, we place a high value on it in this culture. So that process, which I think is the most important one, that process can begin immediately. How are these messages being sent? How are they being cultivated within subcultures and reference groups inside of St. Mary's? How are these messages being sent? Such that a significant number of people will see this behavior as appropriate. And you can say the same thing about race, about sexual orientation, people with disabilities. These messages are real. They're not just part of the personalities of the people who do these things. This is part of the whole community. And if we're not willing to step back, and that's hard, that's disturbing. If we cannot step back and see how we are living, we are participating in and making happen a system in which such behavior to a significant number of people is seen as appropriate and normal. If we can't step back and ask that kind of critical question, then I think we'll just go where people have been going for generations, and it will continue.
Yeah, another thing along these lines, we're seeing like in this political season and some of the attacks on kind of political correctness, and these things have been going on, well, not only with Trump, but of course in the preceding 7 years, for a long time, but they seem to have kind of amped up, and so suddenly we're dealing with this as well, and so suddenly students are seeing behavior as okay because they're seeing it modeled by people in the news and things like that, and so kind of wondering what are we to do about that?
Well, again, you're trying to form a friend of mine once said her model of change was, you can't change the whole thing, but she has the Swiss cheese model of change, where you can create these pockets where you start pioneering very different ways of organizing social life. And my sense of your effort is that you're trying to make St. Mary's such a model for how to do it differently. And so, no, we can't change what's going on in this country. It's not manageable. We don't have that kind of power. So we start with what we've got, and we work where we are. And yes, there are a lot of sources for these messages that are very destructive. But somewhere we have to start creating systems that generate very different messages as part of normal everyday life. And I think that's what you're about here. So, Leonard, maybe at the end we might have time to have more conversation about this, but I think it's time for me to stop and you to pick up.
So thank you, Alan. That has certainly given me a lot to think about. I want to talk a little bit about the work groups, and I think it's connected to what Alan is talking about, because ideally, when Dr. Jordan was first talking about the work groups, the idea was ideally that we are trying to do something different by forming these groups and really thinking about how do we look at both the individual and the systemic issues that cause or at least affirm that those individual behaviors. And so I wanted to share a little bit about what each of the working groups is charged with and some of the things that they are doing. But I think the key aspect of it is that I think that the work groups are a way that we can really embed this idea of looking at both the individual behavior and certainly wanting to have accountability on that level, but not being solely focused at that level, but really starting to ask about the systems, what is it about us and our community that affirms those behaviors that we believe go against our vision of inclusiveness. So I think that that's the idea, and the groups I think are perhaps the structures that will allow us to embed that in the culture. So just quickly, the Campus Culture Policy and Programming group is really charged with looking at the campus climate and developing refining policy. That group has done a Thrive analysis, and I think that is going to be, again, this powerful way of really kind of getting data from the community and giving us something to measure ourselves against, and embed that, again, as a process for us as a community over the long run. Then what do those, what does that measurement or that baseline, what are the implications for programming, for policy, those types of things? I think it's a great way, again, not necessarily focusing on this one-time event, but this kind of long stretch of how we want to view ourselves and measure ourselves as a community. The civility group is charged really with asking this idea of how do we incorporate the St. Mary's Way into curricular and pro-curricular opportunities. And they've drafted a civility statement. And I think that one of the things that we need to decide is how do we, what do we do with that draft? Do we, is it a standalone document? Do we incorporate it into the St. Mary's Way? And then beyond that, again, how do we help that to really come to life and be part of the ethos of the culture here? The education and training group is looking specifically at education and training, obviously, and really how to provide education and training for the entire community. And I think you'll hear a little bit later about specifics of a proposal that they are about to put forth to begin next year. But again, I think that's going to be a very important idea of thinking about, sitting and listening to a webinar or going through a training session for an hour or something is not the silver bullet that is going to address many of the things that we're talking about. So we need to think on both levels there. The hate and bias is the next group, and that's not what it's titled, but that's what it's focused on. It's not the hate and bias group, but it really the idea was to develop a bias response team that would be a support for individuals who were targeted, to make sure individuals understood what all of their options are, But the team hasn't been very much utilized, and I'll talk a little later about what we hope to do over the summer, perhaps to change that. And then the last work group was focused on sexual misconduct and really looked at our current hearing process and how perhaps we could look at that a little differently and make the efforts, the process a little bit more easy for all of the involved parties. And where we are in that process, that group recommended to Michael Dunn to kind of examine that. And he has spent the year really looking at that, and we're hopeful that we will have something a different process of doing that approved for next fall. So that's one of the one of the very concrete things that has come from that group. So again, I think that this idea, and I'm not going to write this on my hand, but I do like the idea of keeping it somewhere where I can see it, because I think at least with the work groups, that it will be a continual reminder for us of how are we ensuring that we're looking at both the individual and the systemic issues. And I think that's what's going to help really have an impact on campus, as opposed to just again kind of one-time events. Any questions about that or comments?
Could we just, I don't know if people know who's working on the work group, so if you're a member of the work group, could you just sort of shoot up a hand so people can see? I mean, there's been a lot of work, so the folks who've been working with us probably number total of about 30 or so folks who are regularly part of the effort, meeting 3 weeks monthly on various schedules. But I'm really appreciative. Joanne, for instance, is a member of 2 work groups. And so, I mean, that's just really sort of evidence of the level of commitment that we see in this group. So I just want to sort of publicly thank you, Rose and Robin and others who are part of that effort. And then also, just sort of, if you're interested in becoming part of the work group, let us know, because that's sort of an ongoing opportunity to become part of that work.
Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Sybil, I believe, to talk about the vision.
So the last time we met, we looked at a draft vision statement, and we got a lot of great feedback from everyone in the room about ways to improve the draft statement. And so I worked on it with a lot of help from Scott Moravely. Scott, thank you for your input on this. And so what you see before you is the latest iteration. And I'm hopeful that we can sort of regard this as, a vision statement, a living vision statement that maybe we will amend over time, but maybe today we can sort of reach consensus that this is sort of a baseline statement to guide sort of our commitment and our efforts as a group of people on campus who are really committed to transforming the culture here. So I'll just sort of I'll read through it and then just talk about some of the points very briefly. The first line really captures the idea of a vision. Like, this is the kind of community we want. We will establish a well-integrated, inclusive, mutually supportive, and just community at St. Mary's by focusing on the following. First, welcoming, respecting, keeping safe, and cultivating empathy among students, faculty, staff, and community members of diverse backgrounds and perspectives. And so this really speaks to the kind of support we want to give to anyone who finds themselves on this campus, and sort of the emotional connection we want to cultivate in order to get to the issue that Alan spoke about, of having people have a stronger sense that they are part of a St. Mary's community. Secondly, really thinking a lot about our academic and co-curricular approaches, offering rigorous, innovative, and distinctive curricula and programming that integrate theory and practice, and that examine systematically and regularly issues of privilege, power, difference, equity, inclusiveness, and history. Thirdly, manifesting our strong moral compass and working against injustice, both systemic and individual, on our campus and beyond it. So really sort of building a sense in the community-wide, that just as we have in our college mission statement a commitment to social justice, as we have that in our vision statement, that we are the ones, right, that we've been waiting for to really sort of promote this and to influence others in that direction. And then finally, providing a physical and emotional infrastructure, building spaces, systems, practices, and communications, and also a public image, marketing and community relations that reflect the aforementioned commitments and values in good faith. So that when people walk onto the campus, they know what kind of place we are. They know what we're committed to by the material culture that exists here, and that the messaging that we give on our website, and our interactions, and all our promotional materials really reflect the commitment we have to these values. Thoughts, comments, anything here that you object to? Or does this feel like a statement we can get behind? Yeah, Leonard.
I feel like the second statement needs to have something like perhaps how can you offer when we still are not clear what we're doing? I think faculty, staff, right?
Mm-hmm.
So some sort of statement that's ongoing of like, I mean, practicing is one way, but as well as not researching, but somehow still investigating, I think is important with that statement, because we are still hearing from students that faculty still don't know how to integrate equity, multicultural understanding within the curriculum instruction.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like there's something missing that we as faculty, students, and staff need to still continue to practice, to
learn
and be informed.
Yeah, that's really helpful because it does sort of presuppose that we already have the resources to offer it, right?
And knowledge.
Yeah. And so let me also say that there is, the draft vision statement is in the Google Drive, and we'll resend that link. So if anyone wants to help with the wordsmithing, that would be really helpful. Just feel free to offer your suggestions. Yes.
I guess with statement number 1, I understand, I guess, like, the notion behind it in terms of creating an environment that's supposed to relay empathy and a collaborative effort of faculty and staff. But I'm wondering if there's going to be any sort of like amendment as to how as a collective we would move towards that, like with any type of like programming or I don't know, drafting up something that would let student body and faculty know that this is what we plan to do, I guess, step by step to create that sort of environment. Because it still kind of seems that like it's just like a general statement as to how this is what we plan to do, but there's not like a definite like, well, these are the actions that we will take to create that sort of environment.
Yeah, and so this is a really good point. And so the challenge then that we have is, so this is the vision statement, and the question is how do we sort of articulate a vision that acknowledges where we are, acknowledges where we want to go, and also how we will get there. And I don't know how to do that. But that's something that we can maybe collectively, again, incorporate those suggestions. Yeah.
I don't know if they necessarily need to all be wrapped into one. I think that at least the way that I look at the vision statement is like, Crystal, you're from Brooklyn, right?
Yes.
Okay, so we're going to Brooklyn. That's what the vision statement says. And what you're asking is, how are we going to get there? And I think what we're trying to do is that might be a separate, the action steps might be a separate kind of collection of these are all the things that we're going to do to try to meet this. But the vision statement just keeps us the aspiration of what we're shooting for in the forefront.
Yeah, I was wondering if like number 4 gets to that. We start talking about physical and emotional infrastructure, and infrastructure can be practices, systems, programs too, I suppose.
Yeah, that's good. And yet, I'm sort of sympathetic. Your concern ties to Leonard's concern, which is let's not have language here that presumes that we're ready to offer, that we're ready to do this, like that we're equipped and prepared to do all this. That somehow, maybe in the vision statement, we want to say that we are becoming this.
Yeah, it's aspirational.
Yeah. But to make that really explicit, that we are becoming.
Sybil?
Yes. Hi.
One thing I just wanted to interject here is that if you're going to Brooklyn, how do you get to Brooklyn? Well, first thing you do is you go through your door outside your apartment or your house. You take the first steps. And having done that, you might get to Brooklyn in 20 different ways, depending on what you encounter outside the door. So if you get arrested when you walk outside the door, getting to Brooklyn might involve first getting out of jail. And so that the thing that's important to identify is what's the next step. So if we're going to get from here to there, where are we starting? And I don't have to know what the 100th step in this is,
Right.
in order to know what the first one is.
Sybil?
I love this. I'm wondering if there's anything that you would consider adding to number 3. I feel like that's the work, right? Like that. And so I'm really struck by in this diagram, right, the bit on the right-hand side that says something about as we participate in social systems, we are shaped by socialization and by politics of least resistance. So it's this politics of least resistance that we have to actively fight against.
Yeah.
And I know why you've left it pretty broad when you say our strong moral compass and working against injustice. I'm wondering if we could add in language like anti-racism or anti-bigotry, which makes it very clear that that is the very explicit task before us, like really naming it.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. And again, I want to say, I'm going to send this link to y'all. And because there is a sense in which I think we will continue to improve and enhance this. And so if we can work together to do that, that would be really great. So, yeah. Thank you. Dave.
So I want to thank everybody who worked on this. I also love the statement. I think I would have loved it more an hour ago. And Alan's comments have made me wonder about if we accept that. I think it's really compelling, the idea that these acts aren't sort of aberrant acts, that they are part of St. Mary as it is right now. Then it feels like the statement needs to acknowledge that there's a certain amount of work to question ourselves.
Yeah.
And I think I see that as a little bit missing.
Mm-hmm.
And when you say things like welcoming, respecting, and keeping safe, I know what we're going for. But if part of us as a community includes that which begat the Natty Go to this, then I don't really think we need to keep that safe. We need to expose that and question that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So obviously, the language of keeping safe means keeping members of our community safe
Right.
from these kinds of injustices, and and doing that in sort of efficient language. So it is really sort of a challenge. The challenge we face is to say somewhat succinctly a lot of really important things, and that's where it needs to become kind of a corporate effort of everybody sort of helping with that. Because the fewer perspectives we have working on this, the more limited it is going to be. So yeah. I mean, I think you're absolutely right. I like the idea of adding the language of engaging in self-reflection, like perpetual self-reflection. Yeah, Ronnie.
So, and Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think that's kind of where I felt like maybe number 2 was sort of missing something, because, talking about examining issues of privilege, power, difference, equity within the curricula, but not doing that as an institution, I think is something that's missing.
Yeah. So I was trying to capture that with curricula and programming. So there's something about assessment then, right? So there's something like self-assessment that's understood at the individual and the institutional level.
Yeah,
That's kind of what you...
sort of looking at even like actions and structures within the institution, like actually.
And if I think that's why I want number 2 to be beefed up, because I think
Yeah,
that's where, because it says on our campus, right, working against injustice on our campus. But I would love for that to be much more explicit, because if we are not explicit about challenging injustice, it will not happen.
Right.
Because that's the path of least resistance, perpetuate the stuff that.
Okay, so it's coming to your mailbox. And I know that I won't expect to see anything happen in the next 2 weeks. So it will be in your mailboxes again after commencement. And you have all summer. So thank you. All right, what's next? Oh, yes, we hear you. Take it away, Leonard.
So we just wanted to share a couple of things that, one of the things that we talked about last time was, not meeting for meeting's sake, but really wanting to hear what are some concrete actions that are going on that will begin to get at some of the outcomes that we hope for our community. And so we're going to talk just a little bit about those. The first one is orientation. I've asked the folks in my division who work with orientation to think specifically about what is particular experiences that we can incorporate into orientation as we do address other issues in orientation that are specific to diversity and inclusion and equity. So they are working on that. That will definitely be a piece of orientation that will occur this year. And again, I think we want to begin thinking about how do we embed that in a way so that it is a natural and important part of how we welcome new students into our community. I will also be talking about it at the opening convocation. I get to say a few words, and I think that this needs to be a central part in multi-ways that students get this as they're coming in. So those are 2 concrete ways in which we'll make sure that during orientation that these issues are introduced to our new students. All right. Turn it over to Antonio.
Can I pose a question here?
You sure can.
So we're targeting students, and only students, but faculty and staff could also benefit from orientation of that type. And I'm wondering if we're planning on expanding, or if we're starting small and then we're thinking later, what is there a thought process there?
There is. I think I can speak better to that.
And returning students as well.
Yes.
Right.
Returning, transferring. So recognizing the need to have a systematic approach to all of this, right? We're recommending a multifaceted approach that is both voluntary training, education, resources that are available, but also mandatory training and education for all constituencies on campus, students, staff, and faculty. So we'll be working with Leonard's office, but in general, we're recommending this multifaceted approach because we see that there are these disparate events and activities and resources on campus, but it's not always, we lack coordination, we lack many different areas, things that can make us more effective at addressing these issues of inclusivity, diversity, and equity. So we are recommending, we're drafting a proposal, the Education and Training Group is drafting a proposal that contains these elements. Mandatory diversity training for students, staff, and faculty on race, discrimination, issues of injustice that will be we hope to implement beginning of the year, but carry on throughout the year. We hope to have teaching excellence workshops for faculty, that speak about race, discrimination, injustice, sexual violence, hot topic, hot button issues that we've faced this year, this semester, right, in recent weeks. We hope to have training for staff as well as part of this this mandatory training. So workshops for faculty, workshops for staff, also small community conversations for incoming and transfer students. And so this is the campus-wide approach. For students specifically, one of the recommendations that we're proposing is curricular changes, and an emphasis on courses that speak to social justice or social injustice. So we're recommending that as well. In addition, one of the other items that we're proposing are campus webinars and workshops that we'll be providing throughout the year. This is more of a voluntary resource that we'll provide for everyone campus-wide, students, staff, faculty. So we're hoping to provide several webinars and workshops that are available to the different constituencies on campus, and provide a systematic, periodic resource for all constituencies. We also hope to implement and expand the speaking of race monologues. So we had this past year, this current academic year, but we want to expand this to not just students, but to staff and faculty, to give them this opportunity to speak about race and discrimination and these systematic injustices that afflict our community, but larger culture and society. So we're working on implementing that, or hoping to implement that as well. And then finally, we're recommending the establishment of a signature speaker series on IDES, inclusivity, diversity, and equity. So bringing in folks to give lectures on these issues, maybe something similar to the NITED program or to the programs that the English department has, where we bring in speakers that can discuss these issues, provide expertise, and provide a forum for discussion on these issues. Right. So it's more or less where we stand. This is again a proposal. We're recommending that President Jordan will approve of the proposal and implement it, but we'll see. Of course, we're working within budgetary constraints and whatnot, but one of the things that we recognize is the need to have a formal structure that will hopefully work within the potential Office of Diversity, but also with the work groups to provide these resources to the faculty, staff, and students. As many have noted, this is something that we think is necessary. So, what else? Oh, the last thing I would say, and we sort of touched on this earlier, is we have folks working within the work groups, and we have, of course, Sybil and all the work she's doing, essentially leading this. So we need to give her, props for that. But if you have ideas, questions, comments, concerns, I think you all know how to reach one of us, right? So please don't hesitate to ask or to give input. Are there any questions? Yes.
So as far as the implementation of these types of trainings and whatnot, is it going to be like completely a top-down structure where like administration is telling us that this is what we want to do, or is it going to be bottom-up where you want like student and faculty and staff involvement, or is it going to be like a combination of the two?
It's going to be the latter. We hope to have a combination, right? So this is a multifaceted approach where we have, not everyone, but most folks buying into these efforts. Essentially, you'll have this, we can't escape this hierarchy where the administration is saying, we want to do this, we think it's important, but the ideal is that we have buy-in from all constituencies and we all contribute to these efforts. That's the hope.
I think this proposal is great. I'm glad all of you have been putting so much work into this. I think it's going to be wonderful and hopefully pay great dividends. How specific is the proposal? Just out of curiosity, like, have you already identified specific speakers, for instance, specific course topics?
We have done some of it, but it still needs some refinement. Right now, we're focusing on outlining a structure for the proposal and resources that would be needed for the proposal and how we would implement. But we have identified some speakers. We have identified training modules and experts that will help us implement. But it's still a work in progress. So, but I think one of the things that we are definitely emphasizing is mandatory training for all constituencies. I think this is an essential element to a diversity proposal. I know I have already heard from my colleagues in Kent that they've told me that there's going to be some pushback, and they themselves have told me that there's going to be pushback. But this is one of the really an essential part of the proposal, that we have everyone, even those that don't want to, be part of this. You have to buy in, right? Or else we'll never take this step in changing the culture that we are part of, right? As part of the problem. So the proposal that we are developing at present is essentially a one-year proposal. Over the summer and into the next academic year, we will work on developing a multi-year proposal. So that, we hope, and based upon what our experience is in the fall, will help us refine this into a more refined and structure for the college.
Just one thing to say in terms of how some of these things in the proposal are presented. So for the Reimagining Diversity class this semester that I was teaching in the ADS program, we did a survey of the students, and there was 170 in our sample. We asked a number of the solutions, some of the things that you discussed there, and basically what the students noticed. And I have some of the specific numbers and things that are in the report and in the presentation that we'll do next Wednesday at 3 o'clock. But essentially, the mandatory required things that we suggested, like a diversity class and core requirements, anything that was like required was the least popular. Like the diversity class was the least thing. The things that were most popular in terms of suggestions were like a more diverse student body, more social interactions, those type of things. So we kind of point that out and kind of, see that people don't really want to seem to do very much. If it's required, it was like, we don't want to do that. So I think in terms of the delivery of it, using mandatory, required, I think that's going to make people aware of it right away. So I think it's how that message is delivered. Like we really need
the labeling, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Whenever you say that you have to do something or tell people you have to do this, right, there's always pushback. But one of the things that we have seen over the course of this year, and we've sort of seen that in the drive analysis and the other events that we've put on this year, is that when you make it voluntary or say we're doing this, you get this, right? You don't get the 1,000 or 1,500 or 2,000 folks that are here, and so that's kind of the problem. And so I understand that concern. I'm sensitive to that, but there's also this larger issue that when we make it voluntary or just say, hey, you should think about this, well, we miss out on a huge swath of the campus population.
Yeah. So one of the things that we've been in conversation about is that one of the ways to maybe motivate people who are reluctant is to remind them that, that it's important to students. And so maybe part of the messaging would be to just issue that reminder. When a student asks me to do something, that's really powerful to me. So, maybe even getting students to write to faculty and say, here are the reasons why we really would like you to participate in this or be involved with this.
Horizontally too, right?
Yeah.
Students can also push each other in ways that anything else would be top down.
Yeah, and we can influence staff and faculty. Right. We can influence our colleagues.
And when you make it mandatory, you also send a message that this is not simply about individuals.
Yeah.
I think it's part of pointing to the systemic nature of this, so that when it's mandatory, what it's saying is we're all in this together.
Right.
And the mandatory training is the this. It's one of the thises in that. There's a paradox here, you know, that there's ways in which these columns are not about you and me as individuals. And there are ways in which they are about us as individuals. And if we're going to stretch the community's perception beyond just individuals saying, well, for example, well, I don't need that training. And my response to that is, that's good for you, but this isn't about you. This is about something larger, and the mandatory training is an example of building a container for something larger. And if it's going to be the whole community, then we all have to show up. And that's an important message in itself.
That's one of the reasons why the all-campus conversation on April 6th was so effective, because we were all there together, hearing the same message, interacting with each other.
Was the sexual assault thing that we were mandated to do, who does that come from?
I don't mind.
Yeah, I was actually just going to say, you know, there's mandatory sexual assault and Title IX training that all faculty and staff have to do annually that, you know, first years and new students have to do. So offline, I'd be happy to talk about how to do this, and I think also how to align our efforts and, you know, make sure we're not working at odds.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And so then the other thing that I also, I'm sorry, Vera, go ahead. I see your hand.
I was going to suggest for some of the trainings that are voluntary, can there be some sort of identifier for those faculty and staff who have chosen to buy into them, kind of like with the community training where they're able to put a sticker outside their office door? Can we have something like that for diversity and inclusion so that, like, we as students know when I see that professor, I know that this is somebody who voluntarily took that extra step to try to engage in these issues?
I think, yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
So a lot of the hard work in all of this is cultural change, right? And that's part of what's so difficult. So I want to tell you a quick story about cultural change in our own department. In this case, it was entirely, or almost entirely, accidental. So, you know, math departments don't have a great reputation around academia for being, like, you know, welcoming to students. But back in 2000, we had a conversation, and we instituted something we call a no criticism zone. And it's simply this, that like in no public space will you ever find any mathematicians, math or computer science faculty griping about students to anybody else, ever. You just won't. And we didn't, you know, back in 2000, we didn't think of this as a way of catalyzing cultural change, but it has. And now when you ask the faculty now, you know, especially those of us who have been around for a decade or longer, you know, what's the biggest change that's happened, you know, in this department? That was it. And so I'm wondering if there are ways that we can sort of plant that seed more intentionally in departments, in conversations that happen in departments about, you know, starting conversations that lead to 2, 5, 10 years later to having a more inclusive atmosphere within those spaces.
Can I ask, was there a leadership change, or was there someone that initiated this, or what was the impetus? Usually there's something that changes.
Honestly, it was an idea I picked up at a professional development thing, and I introduced it to the department before I even started teaching. I mean, it was sort of an afterthought at our retreat. It was like, does anybody have anything else? And I said, I heard this crazy idea, and I put it out there. Yeah, so it was almost the opposite of that.
Yeah, I can say that we've done stuff like that in the English department. This is just giving me an idea for our fall workshops, which we do every August. And we task as a department, we said, okay, how do we want to run as a department? And you know, we'll kind of come up with rules, you know, to various things. And I think that this would be where a lot of different departments are represented here. Those of you who have workshops, and it might be possible to introduce. Say, okay, this is our agenda item. What ways can we influence our culture?
Well, I think one of the ways in which we can, or one of the things we can build on, is the mission statements that departments put out regarding the issues that have happened in the past month or so. I think I'm almost sure that each department has put out statements regarding these issues.
Right.
So maybe that can be something that we can build on and introduce in faculty or department retreats and whatnot. But just an idea.
Great point.
I wanted to add that we extend this to our students now. So we have a lot of students we employ as teaching assistants. And part of the training they go through is to learn about what the no criticism zone is and what the ways in which we envision it working. And so students become a part of that as they become a part of the department.
Well, if you have further suggestions or ideas, you can email me or contact one of us. We appreciate it.
So I'll talk about the diversity officer. And one of the concerns in the last meeting was to find ways to coordinate our many efforts, because the comment was made, we kind of have a lot of cooks in the kitchen right now in diversity initiatives, and we ought to be thinking about working more, in a more coordinated fashion together, which is, of course, why we are here. So President Jordan submitted a proposal to the Budget Committee. I don't know how many of you know about this. Submitted a proposal to the Budget Committee under the New Initiatives program related to the strategic plan for an Associate Vice President for Inclusion and Diversity. And the Budget Committee recommended that position be funded for next year, so we're very excited about that. I'm not sure what happens next with respect to the approval of that, but to supplement President Jordan's proposal, the Campus Culture Work Group devised a proposal for a full office of equity, inclusion, and diversity that would be staffed by the AVP, an office associate or program coordinator or fiscal associate that could be shared with another department, maybe the Student Scholars Program. So there would be at least part-time support in the way of a professional staff, but also, I think very importantly, student staff. So that the AVP would be supported by the MAP coordinator, which next year will be Vera. Also, work study students, a professional fellowship program funded by the Career Center, so an intern in that position. And then another very important part of the structure would be to build sort of a broad base of support and coordination. So we proposed the creation of an equity council that would be comprised of the leaders of our equity and diversity programs. So the Title IX coordinator, the coordinator of LGBTQ services, coordinator of disability services, and so the AAEEO officer, and then also student representatives. So that there would be, again, regular communications between the AVP and the staff and faculty and students on campus who are really sort of heading up diversity and equity initiatives. And on the other side would be support by means of the work groups. So continuing to have the work groups working in support of that office would be really important. We also proposed the creation of a staff or faculty diversity fellow. So someone coming up from the staff and faculty, this could be a rotating position, where they would get, in the case of faculty, a course relief, in the case of staff, some release of time to work in the office to support these efforts. And so there's much more to say about that. We also proposed locations, possible locations, and that sort of thing. So we're just waiting to hear what the next steps will be. But we're hopeful that maybe next year we will have an AVP and begin to build the structure for a full and sustainable Office of Equity, Inclusion, and Diversity.
This isn't directly related to that, but the admissions numbers that we were hearing as of a couple of days ago put us a good 60 behind where we were budgeted for. 60 students translates to about $1.2 million per year for the next 4 years. So I think we should all be at least prepared for what that might look like budget-wise.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
Just the last, a lot of the feedback that we got from students about the bias response team is just not being aware of it. So one of the recommendations was that there be essentially a marketing campaign that is on par with what Michael does with Title IX stuff in terms of ensuring that incoming students are aware of what those resources are in the campus. The campus at large is aware as well. So that will be that's one of the things on my to-do this summer is to ensure that two things. One, that people are aware of it as a resource, but also to be clear about the purpose of the group. And I think depending on this position and what happens, there may be some shifts in who is on that, and I think ultimately an AVP would be would oversee it. But as the summer progresses and as we learn about the position and what we can expect from it, at minimum there will be I think clear messaging to the entire community about the emergency, the bias response team as a resource on campus and what it does. So I think there are like Sybil said, we know that there are other people who are working on multiple things, and we wanted to just open up the floor to see if there are other things that folks wanted to share with the group so that we are aware of what other things are going on.
So there were a few of us on the faculty after the last faculty meeting who got together, and we wanted to sort of dig deeper than the surface issues of the serious but still surface issues of Confederate flags and hate speech, and talk about sort of more insidious forms of racism and sexism that sort of permeate all of us. And what we ended up with was a list of what I think are really quite hard questions that the college and the community should be asking. And anybody who's on the faculty has seen these or seen a link to these. I just printed out 5 or 10 of them for people who are staff or students here. And these really range. They range from the fact that we are requiring background checks for many positions on campus, and that makes us part of the racially skewed mass incarceration systems that we have in this country. And is that something we want to do? We continue. Columbia University is now the first in the country to divest of all holdings that involve prisons and jails. That's something we want to. We want to sort of remove ourselves from that part. There are questions about pedagogy. There's a lot of evidence that interactive pedagogy closes the gaps between close racial and gender gaps in the sciences. And yet we sort of stand by some sort of academic freedom that professors are sort of free to teach in any way they want. These are hard questions, and we don't claim that there are easy answers, but we think that the conversations that these questions might start could be very productive. And so we would love to see venues in which we could have conversations about these questions and sort of try to move the discussion forward.
And Alan, I'll send you that because it would be great to get your feedback too on these questions. And
are you all aware of the New Jersey Project?
No.
You want to Google the New Jersey Project. They gathered for years. They gathered information about how faculty in all departments can integrate these issues into their curricula. And they also talk about teaching strategies, all of that stuff. And Paula Rothenberg was the one, I think, who pioneered this. And I don't know that it actually exists as an organization anymore, but I have no doubt that the materials that they gathered are available. But it's just it's a terrific resource.
Thank you. Hi, Rose.
So basically, the new orientation leaders that are going to be OLs for this year's orientation have had meetings, and we've talked a lot deeply about what we need to do in terms of changing our training sessions related to diversity talks. And a lot of things that the new orientation leaders have brought upon was not only a talk about race and racial issues, but about sex, gender identities, and also people with disabilities and abilities. So I think that this year for orientation, we're going to have specific training focusing on each type with underneath the branch of diversity, which I think interesting and something that could be reached out also to like RA training. On top of that, Shelby Perkins assigned all of the OLs to read a book called Americana. And if y'all are interested in reading that book as well, that's going to be a great discussion book that will be used throughout training, not only for the diversity talk. And I know last year we did an academic reading for the orientee. I think we'll do the same thing this year. And I think it's going to be a book of Lucille Clifton's poems, and I think some of them are going to have like topics related to these types of issues. I don't really know exactly the title of the book. We haven't, the orientation unit he hasn't been given those books yet. I don't know if he will, but that's what we're up to right now.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yeah.
That is good news. And I ordered my copy of Americana when Shelby told me about this. Yeah.
So, when you write down a list of different things that are going on, different projects on campus that should be included, I would like to see the Emerging Scholars Program included on the
Okay, great. And this, actually, I wanted to just make sure everybody knows that there is now a new website for inclusivity, equity, and diversity. I don't know if everybody's tapped into that. And so I've been thinking about the Emerging Scholars Program and the navigators as links that should appear on those pages as well. And we have some of our programs are listed but not linked yet. It's still a work in progress, but thank you for that because we want to make that a space where all of our activities are really reflected. Anything else happening? We're excited about Matt. We're excited that Vera is our Vera is our new math coordinator. We just appointed new math navigators for next year, so they'll be, again, doing a lot of programming alongside, of course, the cultural clubs that do the regular programming. So I guess that's it. Any final questions, thoughts, comments?
Thank you all for your hard work on this.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming. Thank you so much. Alan, thank you so much, as always, for being you and for your support.
Till next time.
Till next time. All right, take care.